guys, I'm Andy with Northwoods TCG, and today we're going to be talking about Metazoo. As you can see from the opening, Metazoo has officially closed down. We will no longer be seeing any more production, and it has officially been terminated as a TCG as of January 29th, 2024, if you're seeing this. Now, this is something that was a little bit unexpected. I didn't expect it to happen this soon, but I think that a lot of us did see the writing on the wall for quite a while now that this was actually going to happen fairly soon. We didn't think it was going to be this soon, but we knew it was going to happen. Overall, Metazoo's performance just hasn't been there as a TCG, and overall, the IP itself was very, very weak and struggling for quite a bit of time. They really couldn't get growth or traction, and they were continually seeing the downfall ever since the release of Cryptic Nation First Edition. And today we're going to be talking about that and also looking into things that we could learn from this when you're trying to look into other TCGs as investments. And then second of all, we're going to sit here and talk about how this all came about and what the total events were that led up to this. So before we get any further, before you guys go any further into the video, be sure you guys hit that subscribe. It's greatly appreciated. Also, hit that notify so you know when we're doing new videos. And last but not least, be sure that you hit that like button. It helps out a ton. They like these videos and just keep them moving. And I know typically I talk about Pokemon, and I'm sure a lot of the people out there know that I talk about Pokemon. But today I figured it was a good time, since this has just happened, to have this discussion. And as I'm doing this video, there are currently lives going right now for Pokemon Knowledge, doing a live talking about the fall of Metazoo. We've seen Possum Bud already release a video at this point in time, and there's several other videos from content creators just coming out like crazy. And once again, I just want my viewers to hear my perspective on this, because it's something that's come up several times on this channel. When we're talking about investing in the TCGs, it's inevitable to talk about new TCGs and their availability for investment. So first and foremost, I'm going to show you all the Metazoo that I personally own. This is it. This is all that I ever bought into Metazoo, because I just was never confident with it. This came up at the store. I mean, I got, one pack of Nightfall First Edition, and then I've got 3 packs of Cryptic Nation Second Edition, which I thought was an interesting thing that it's a second edition. I've never seen a TCG before do that, which was kind of an interesting fact why I kind of purchased it when I saw it on the shelves. Now, did I think it would be good investments? Not really. I just thought it was kind of cool to have some Metazoo, just to have some in the collection, just to say that I have some. Once again, dead TCGs are also fun to collect. Personally, I do enjoy them, but that wasn't the reason I bought it. It was just kind of just to have some of it, and the second edition was really interesting to see that format. But that's all I've got, guys. I never really purchased into Metazoo, and you've heard me. If you follow this channel since the release of Metazoo when it first came out, I always had my concerns and doubts with Metazoo. Now, I always hoped that they would do good, and I always wished them the best. I never wanted to see the platform itself fail. But in general, I was always had concerns that they didn't build up like a traditional IP for a TCG. Instead of really focusing on the player base and printing for that player base and continuing to grow a player base, just as we've seen with One Piece, with Lacana, a lot of the other new TCGs that are currently coming out, we're seeing them grow a player's base before they really get big. And, you know, they have big IPs to start out with. One Piece and Lacana are both very bad examples compared to Metazoo, because One Piece already has a successful anime. Disney, well, Disney's huge. We already know these. They already have a big fan base just on the movies and the shows and all the content that they create. But when it came down to that fact, Metazoo always had a disadvantage. And let's be honest, Mike had a very, very interesting concept of having this big Kickstarter and really pushing this Kickstarter not to players. The player base was never really included in that first Kickstarter. He went right for people like Rudy at Alpha Investment. He went right for these big name people who turned it into an investment, that turned it into this big investment idea. And that's why these boxes skyrocketed right at the beginning. And when you asked me what was my biggest concern about that, I said the fact we don't have player base. If you have a TCG and you don't have player base, you're not getting the player base into the hype, and you're not allowing them to build. Every TCG is like a pyramid, right? You get that player base. If you got a TCG, you have to build a player base. If you don't have players, you don't have a TCG. You just got collectible cardboard. That's completely different factors when it comes down to the success of any TCG. If you don't get people playing it and getting it out on the floor, getting people to use it, getting the people to join in and start playing with it, you don't have a TCG. You just have collecting cards. You got Cabbage Patch Kids, or what were they? Garbage Pail Kids. That's an example of what they were almost creating right off the bat. They created a market that was so tight and so expensive that they pushed most people out of it. even myself as an investor, I wasn't even willing to look at it because it got so expensive that it really wasn't worth any value to me to jump in on those particular Kickstarter boxes and first edition boxes. They just went crazy. That's a big hindrance to start off right away. And that was my biggest thing, is when people asked me on lives, when people would ask me when Basic was on the channel, when he asked me what I thought about Metazoo, and when I saw other people sit there and bring that up in chats, and when we've talked about Metazoo and other channels, that was always my concern. We weren't seeing players. At my local LGS, Metazoo was the only TCG that we didn't have a night for. It isn't getting played. Lacana has a night. One Piece has a night. Yu-Gi-Oh!, Magic, Dungeons and Dragons, Pokemon has nights. They all have nights in rotating schedule. Even Dragon Ball Z has a playing night still at my local LGS. Flesh and Blood, all of these ones were very successful in playing and had players coming that was worth them keeping a night or a block every other week at least open for these TCGs to continue to play. We did not see that with Metazoo, and that was my biggest concern. Even 1 year in, when I was asked by Basic on the live that he was on, would I invest in Metazoo? Do I think Metazoo is going to be successful? I was always very, very hesitant to say yes. And you could go back to every time I've talked about Metazoo, that's exactly what my feelings were. And those were my concerns. Come fast forward, my concerns did come true. And I didn't want them to. I always said, even back then, I hope Metazoo can get a player base. I hope it can get fee underneath it. And I hope that it can be successful. I think that it could be a lot of fun. I saw some really good playability possibly to it, but even myself, I didn't have as much interest into it, even for the playing factors. I never played Metazoo. I never ever built a battle deck or an actual deck of Metazoo to try and play. It was just always something that was too foreign and too much different than what I was comfortable with personally. And that's just, I'm one person out of millions that could have played this. Overall, this is one of the situations that we wanted to look at. What are something that you can look at TCGs, and you can look at the futures of some of these TCGs. Let's take a look at One Piece, for example, would be another good example. There's a lot of content creators pushing One Piece because it was so successful right off the block. And sometimes with big IPs, that can happen. Even if you have good marketing and get them in front of the right creators, content creators, we can definitely see even TCGs take off really well at first. There's concerns with One Piece, and my concerns are with One Piece, and why I haven't really dove into that is that Bandai is the actual printer of One Piece, which is always concerning. Bandai has a really good habit of really screwing things up further and further they get down the line. And that's a big concern I have for One Piece. Same thing with Dragon Ball Z. They created one great set. Realm of Gods is by far the best DBZ set that I've ever opened. It was fun. You had the opportunity for gameplay inside of it. It actually was a really playable set. And then on top of it, you had those God Rares inside of there that were extremely difficult to pull, which drew in the collecting side of things. But then the next set that they come out, they completely blew it up and destroyed that. And it got rid of everything they built with one set. They did really great. Thought it was going to go somewhere. Thought things were looking really good. And then Bandai did its thing and completely destroyed the next set. And didn't continue to run the trends that were very successful for it in Dragon Ball Z. Could they do that with One Piece? Absolutely. The one thing Metazoo did that I never really agreed with is that they continued to print. They printed 100,000 boxes. Well, they didn't have the player base for those 100,000 boxes, so why did they print it? It felt like it was getting to be more and more of a money grab than it was actually to be a successful TCG. They were no longer looking for the success of a TCG. They were looking for the success of money, and they wanted to grow a very big, powerful, money-built company rather than a player-based company. Those were always the big concerns that I had with Metazoo, and I voiced them several times. I'm not going to sit here and say anybody was right or wrong, but I think we can really use this as a learning curve to help us in the future deciding whether or not something in the TCG world is worth collecting, worth investing, worth putting some money into in hopes that it'll do well in the future. And we are learning step by step in this new market with everybody else that's come in that Pokemon was not available when Metazoo came out. It was still pretty difficult to get and very expensive for some of the booster boxes, even the latest sets. And that's definitely a factor that helped with Metazoo too when they pushed out as hard as they did. Overall, Metazoo, I'm sorry, I understand the player base. I understand some of the people that enjoyed Metazoo, but these were all concerns and reasons that I never really jumped into the Metazoo bandwagon. It was it was a good run for you guys. You know, the people that enjoyed it, I was really hoping when you started getting tournaments, You started having these big profit tournament, big dollar amount tournaments and things like that. But when they really weren't getting big success too, that's another factor. Not a lot of entries into those big dollar tournaments is always a big concern also on why people are not joining in. So we can take a look at everything that's gone on with Metazoo, and we can really hyperanalyze everything that's occurred. But I think the bigger things that we've learned from Metazoo is, number one, always watch how a TCG starts. When a TCG starts off on fire, but only in the creator and investor hobby, and it doesn't have an anime or some other part of its IP, it's strictly a trading card game. To me, that was the number one red flag for me. That was my biggest concern right off the bat, and I think that that's something we should always look at. TCGs want organic growth. You should have organic growth in a TCG for them to be successful. Even Pokemon almost screwed up right off the bat. They printed a ton of base set unlimited. It was sitting around forever. You could have bought that for $40 at your local stores sometimes, the booster boxes, because there was so much. But Pokemon always had the one advantage that they had not only built a card game, a TCG, a successful TCG in Japan prior to coming to the United States. They had a huge English market because of the advertisement campaign that they had from that Japanese market to have tons of product released. They didn't just release TCG cards. They didn't just do that. They released the anime in English. They released binders, t-shirts. They did McDonald's special, Burger King specials, all these specials all over the place. They did a very good job of pushing their IP and using the success that they already had in Japan and pushed it into the United States market. Even Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic, when it first started, it was basically a player release only. The beta and alpha decks for Magic were really only out to players, and players were the only people that got those. They used those decks to test out Magic to see how successful it would be. And then they created Magic, a game that continued to be successful before the playability of that particular game, which grew the Magic brand to what it is today. You can take a look at Yu-Gi-Oh! Another example. They started off as an organic game. They just did trading cards. They got an IP with the anime series right with it. But once again, they had an anime series, which grew one part of the IP, and they had a game, an actual card game that came out. I think it came out right as the anime did. I think they almost came out simultaneously, or the anime might have been slightly before it on Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm a little fuzzy. I'm not a big Yu-Gi-Oh! Guy, just to keep you in check. But they grew a organic gameplay, and they grew a TCG together, and actually had dual IP growth. Metazoo didn't have those advantages. Metazoo didn't come from another country, United States, with money backing it to be able to try and build that base and try and push all of that out there. They strictly went right for the investors, the big guys, the big guns that had money, that knew people with money, and they went strictly for the investor style. And that's why those booster boxes, we never saw that when Pokemon was released in the United States. Yeah, packs went a little expensive sometimes because they were hard to find, the first edition ones. But once the Unlimited came out, the pricing fell out. It wasn't really that high of value. Same thing with Magic. Magic was never, people weren't fighting and tripping over booster boxes to try and buy them at $4, $5, $6, $1,000 for a booster box of the first set of Magic that came out. No, we never saw that. Pokemon never saw that. You sit there, Yu-Gi-Oh! Never saw that. All these successful TCGs that have been successful don't see that. And that was, like I said, the number one red flag that I've pointed out ever since the beginning of Metazoo. And it was a big concern overall. And if that's the learning point that I would take from this, I think when you see a TCG being released, you'd like to see that organic growth. You'd like to see, like Lucana. It's getting pushed a lot to the game players. The game players can purchase that. Yes, investors jumped in. The problem is in our current market, everybody's looking for that next big investment. Everybody's looking for that next Pokemon. So there is going to be a little bit of that fog that you can't really tell. But when I saw Lucana get released to the stores, the LGSs were pushing this. That's good organic growth. That's going to get you that organic growth that gets this thing moving. And we're seeing a lot of game players for Lucana right now. Same thing with One Piece. Investors jumped in on it right away, but it wasn't One Piece trying to go to investors. They weren't going to like Rudy, or they weren't going to SM Pratt, or they weren't going to these bigger channels that were just strictly pushing One Piece. They actually got that just because they got released, right? There's a lot of fans for that anime, and that created that big push for the One Piece market to accelerate extremely quick and have that big burst right off the bat. But we are seeing, even with Bandai printing a lot of One Piece, even the first sets. OP1 is getting a lot of prints. Even OP2 is getting a lot of there's a lot of product now out there. One Piece isn't hard to find any longer. It's not difficult to go and find one piece on the shelf. My local LGS has got a bunch of it. My Walmart has it now in stock. All of it's pretty much becoming available pretty readily right now, and that's because of print rates. And that's the number one thing that can kill a TCG is its print rates. And that's always something to keep in mind also. When you're seeing huge amounts of pre-prints, huge amounts of print rates on these particular sets, that could be another red flag that there might be issues in the future, because if you're a brand new TCG, you have to have a place to go with that product. Even though you have a huge following and a huge burst at first, it doesn't mean that the next sets are going to be as successful. So overall, guys, I think we got a good learning curve on this one. I think that people that are new to TCGs and now got a real good view of a TCG going and rising and falling and disappearing is a good taste for some people. Not that I want it to be happening, but in some ways, it's also good to see these things happen, that even though something has a huge push, a huge following, they got Rudy from Alpha Investments pushing these things and saying how successful it's going to be, that even if that happens and occurs, it shows you that nothing is inevitable, that a collapse of something is never inevitable. It could always happen to even the biggest push, the most expensive releases, the so-called best releases of TCGs that have ever happened. And you could end up right here. So once again, I'm not sitting here saying that I wanted this to happen. It was just something that I voiced my concern about it for a long time. And it's just one of those things that I never bought into Metazoo. I was always concerned about its health and its stability, and was it going to find that stability that was going to make it successful? I was always hoping it would, and I've even had conversations with people in Basic too, that I will feel comfortable with Metazoo when it has a successful player base. When I start seeing it played in our local LGSs, that's when I'm going to say that Metazoo has probably finally made it. And I never saw that. And since it's been released, since Cryptic Nation First Edition came out, I have never seen it played in my LGS. Never. They never carried it. They never even carried Metazoo on their shelves. Even the LGSs around here didn't carry Metazoo. I could only purchase Metazoo online, or like these. You could go buy these at Walmart. These little three-pack bundles. I don't even know how many are in here. I just bought it because it was there. So whatever they are, I think they're 3 packs inside of there. That was the only way that we even saw Metazoo here, which is always a big concern, that they're not being carried by LGSs. And if LGSs aren't carrying it, players aren't getting their hands on it. And if players aren't getting their hands on it, it's never going to be a successful TCG. Once again, guys, hopefully it's some good information. It's a little bit of break from Pokemon. I was going to be doing my TikTok analysis just so you guys can watch the next video that's coming up. I pushed that one. I might release this on Tuesday. If not, you'll get this Wednesday because I'm not going to do my live. You missed the live this week because I am out of town. But I'm leaving tomorrow after the recording of this. And so we'll be doing the TikTok analysis. I'm doing the pros and cons of TikTok coming up the next video, so you'll be able to have a little in-depth look from a user's perspective on some of the pros and some of the cons that I have found in TikTok. I think it's a good time to break that down. Other than that, if you do like this kind of content, as always, hit that subscribe, hit that notify, and last but not least, hit that like button. Hopefully I've earned your subscription today. Hopefully this is a good conversation. Try not to bash Metazoo. I think Metazoo had pretty good opportunities to be successful. They just never put it in the right places. They never put their drive in the right places, which was always a big concern to me personally when it came down to the investing in that TCG. So, like I said, guys, hopefully this is some good content. Hopefully it gives you a good thought process and to really look for futuristically when you're looking at investments into new TCGs, especially brand new Kickstarter TCGs, what to look at and how to be a little bit more cautious in a learning curve using Metazoo as an example. So, that being said, check out the 2 videos at the end, and we'll see you next time here on Northwoods TCG.